Hi everyone, welcome to Mysterious 5. In this video, we're going to check 5 decades-old cold cases solved with the help of DNA technology. The first case on our list is the death of Sherry Black on November 30th, 2010 in Salt Lake City, Utah. 64-year-old Sherry Black was working at B&W Billiards and Books during what she thought would be a mere ordinary day. What Black didn't know was that would actually turn out to be her last day alive. Described by her family as an avid and voracious reader who was well liked within her community, Black, alongside her husband, decided to accomplish her lifelong aspiration of opening a bookstore. Together, they decided to do so right by their house. In a cabin-style little bookstore located on a busy highway, Black would spend her days selling mostly rare antique Mormon books, with prices ranging from a couple to thousands of dollars, completely oblivious that her beloved store would be the location where her life would come to an abrupt ending. On that cold autumn morning, an unknown man entered B&W Billiards and Books and proceeded to viciously attack unarmed Black. Despite putting up a fight, the 64-year-old was fatally stabbed, dying almost immediately. Her body was then assaulted by the man, who then fled the scene, leaving one item behind: an Armani belt with a sticker that read 323. It also contained a small amount of his blood, which would later prove to be crucial to the investigation. Black's body was discovered in the back room of the store later that same day, at approximately 1:43 p.m. by her husband Earl, who immediately called 911. The South Salt Lake Police Department launched a homicide investigation and questioned locals, as well as her widowed husband, trying to figure out why such a thing would happen to someone as respected as Sherry Black. Despite their efforts to find a reason behind the event that led to Black's death, it remained unknown, as the idea of a potential robbery was soon shut down, as no money nor valuable items were taken. An abandoned Armani belt found by the body was taken in for forensic testing. However, it was to no avail, as no match to the blood sample was found in police records. The only information that could be gathered was that the suspect was an African-American man with light brown to brown skin and black hair. Despite all the locals' theories, the flyers, the media attention, and the $250,000 reward, the case eventually went cold and remained a mystery. Though the public seemed to forget about the horrific event, Sherry Black's family certainly did not, as they constantly looked for help to solve what had become just another unsolved case among many others. In 2017, Unified Police Department decided to take over the case and put the DNA collected from the scene 7 years prior through phenotyping, which further confirmed the likelihood of the previous results. A decade after Black's death, the police arrested a man at his house, as he matched the overall description of the suspect. After having his DNA sample collected, it was confirmed that it matched the one that found at the scene back in 2010. Sherry Black's killer was confirmed to be the then teenager Adam Dubourneau, who happened to have quite a criminal history even before the attack that day. Dubourneau always had quite the reputation for his bad behavior, having gone to a juvenile detention center at a young age and being arrested twice over 2 shoplifting incidences, one of them occurring after Black's death. Although Dubourneau's clear motive remains unknown, his social media posts dated 2 years after Black's deaths indicate that his willingness to engage in criminal behavior was the ultimate result of the trauma caused by the incarceration of his adoptive father. Dubourg's posts include an image of a bloody cartoon that read, "Don't upset me, I'm running out of places to hide the bodies," and Facebook posts where he talked about his father coming out of prison, saying such things as, "I am pissed enough to do damage. Take it as you will." The most accepted hypothesis is that Dubourg's revolt is what led him to go as far as killing Sherry Black, who did not deserve such a tragic outcome. It's quite unsettling that he did such things. Nonetheless, Black has passed as someone who was loved by many and without an enemy in the world, in the words of her son-in-law, Greg Miller. Kimberly Ratliff. On January 12, 1999, in West Broadway, Iowa, at approximately 10:40 a.m., an employee from Peoples Natural Gas was clearing snow from the sidewalk when a parked car, a 1988 Plymouth Sundance, caught his attention. As he got closer to take a glance inside, he found something that he would never be able to forget. This is the story of Kimberly Ratliff, an ambitious young woman and first-generation high school graduate who resided in County Bluffs with her mother, Joyce, and her stepfather, Les Kennedy. Her biological father, Jacques, had separated from Joyce when Kimberly was just 5, and they moved away to start a new life with her mother's new partner, Les. The 22-year-old's gruesome fate would come to not only shock the nation, but also to separate even more the Ratliff-Kennedy family, for the worst possible reason. On January 8, 1999, after ending what would turn out to be her very last shift at Airlight Plastics Co., at approximately 11:30 p.m., Kimberly shared her parting words to her coworkers before heading home, completely unaware of what was about to happen. She never reached her destination. At the end of the night, Kimberly was missing for 4 days, and even though people hoped for her to be safe and sound somewhere, the outcome was much more tragic. Kimberly Ratliff's body was found inside an abandoned car at a parking lot on the morning of January 12th. Police described it as one of the most violent attacks. An investigation was launched immediately, and the police determined that whoever killed her didn't do it in the car, as there was not so much blood present at the scene. Her clothes had also been changed since they didn't match the ones that she was last seen in. Due to the degree of damage in her body, the police were quick to conclude that Kimberly's attack was personally aimed at her, and not a kind of wrong place, wrong time type of situation. Thanks to this conclusion, they were able to find some potential suspects. However, due to the lack of evidence to link them to the crime, the case sat cold for nearly 22 years. Fast forward to 2020, the whole world is enduring a global pandemic, while a worried father and brother still seek justice for Kimberly Ratliff, even after 2 decades have passed. Due to new developments in DNA technology, the police were able to match the DNA found in the victim's clothing to her stepbrother, Matt Kennedy. Regardless of all the evidence pointing to Matt Kennedy as guilty, Les Kennedy does not believe his son should be held accountable for Kimberly's death, as he accuses the Council Bluffs Police Department of being negligent with the case and for having attacked his family too many times. He also commented that her stepbrother would not have done that to her. She had him on speed dial if she needed help. Shortly after Matt Kennedy's arrest, Les was also taken into custody for 2 counts of child endangerment causing serious injury, 1 count of domestic abuse by strangulation, and 1 count of false imprisonment. As for the biggest advocate for his daughter, who worked for 2 decades to finally see an arrest made in her case, Jacques Ratliff sadly passed away on January 2nd, 2020. He died without being able to see the justice being served for what had been done to his daughter. The next case is the death of Crystal Beslanowicz. On a late Thursday night in 1995, Crystal Beslanowicz had left her motel room to go to the nearest gas station to buy some food. What had happened next was something that the citizens of Wasatch County will never be able to forget. Crystal Beslanowicz, a Spokane, Washington native, longed to leave her hometown, as she was eager to experience new things and live life to the fullest, despite her quite rough past. Beslanowicz, who had run-ins with the law from a young age for things such as drug violations, auto theft, assault, and sex working, was committed to leaving Washington. So at age 17, she had packed everything and left for Salt Lake City, Utah, alongside her boyfriend, Chris. Despite starting a new life in Utah, Beslanowicz decided to keep working as a sex worker, as that had become the only income that was financially supporting both her and Chris. On December 14, 1995, Crystal Beslanowicz had told her boyfriend that she was heading off to Circle K to grab something to eat. However, she never returned home. As Chris patiently waited whilst time passed, he eventually started to grow concerned for his girlfriend's safety, as it was out of character for her to be out long at night. Even though he asked neighbors next door and went to their local Circle K, it was to no avail, as nobody knew of Beslanowicz's whereabouts. The following day, a rancher and his son, walking by Provo River over 45 miles away from Salt Lake City, spotted a body lying face down, which led them to frantically call the police. An investigation was launched, and the police were able to determine that the cause of death was due to being bludgeoned with a rock. To be able to identify the victim, the police sketched out the distinct tattoos that belonged to her and displayed them through the press, which inevitably got Chris's attention. Chris contacted the police and was able to confirm that the victim was his girlfriend, Tracy Beslanowicz, who had just gone missing. The police managed to obtain Tracy's stepfather's telephone number, who assured them that his daughter Tracy was indeed alive and that the body must have been of his stepdaughter Crystal, who was infamous for stealing her stepsister's identity. The fact that Chris had told them the wrong name was enough for the police to see him as a potential suspect. But upon discovering that he was completely financially dependent on Beslanowicz, that theory was soon dropped. Another potential suspect, a man by the name of Herb Fry, was a local taxi driver that had become head over heels for Beslanowicz. He even told several people that if he couldn't have her, then no one could. However, there was no forensic evidence that could link either man to the scene and no clues on who could have assaulted the 17-year-old. The case eventually went cold. 18 years after Beslanowicz's death, new technology was developed and the case was reopened. The police were now more than ever determined to put an end to the mystery that had lived for far too long, and thanks to the forensic tool MVAX system, they were able to obtain a sufficient amount of evidence from the rock that was used in the attack. It actually matched a man called Joseph Michael Simpson. To confirm that that was indeed Beslanowicz's attacker, Wasatch County Sheriff Todd Bonner flew to Florida and, after following the suspect for days, he was able to collect a discarded cigarette to get a new DNA sample. Surely enough, after nearly 2 decades, Beslanowicz's attacker had been found at last. Shockingly, homicide was nothing new to Joseph Simpson, a shuttle bus driver, as he had previously served 8 years in jail for stabbing a 26-year-old police informant back in 1987, and had parole 8 months before Beslanowicz's death. Even though his motives remained unknown, Simpson's defense attorney argued that there were other accomplices involved, including one that had threatened to kill the teen over a dispute that involved drugs. as another unknown DNA sample was collected from the fatal weapon, as well as from the victim's body. Even though there is not much commentary from the Beslanowicz family, Sheriff Todd Bonner said that it was very, very satisfying to be able to call the victim's mother to share the news of Simpson's arrest, and that phone call is the one that he will treasure for a long time. Crystal Beslanowicz lost her life far too young and endured a lot along the way, but it is sure that with many more years to come, her fierceness will still be admired and her name will definitely never be forgotten. Next up, the case of Evelyn K. Day. It was November 27th, 1979, and the residents of Greenlee, Colorado would cherish the snowy afternoon all in great spirit, as Christmas was just around the corner. Some would play in snowball fights, others would try to make snowmen, but what the residents didn't know was that under all that snow, there was a dead body just waiting to be found. Evelyn K. Jones Day, who went by Kay, was born and raised in Meeker, Colorado, having later moved to Greenlee, Colorado, alongside her husband and kids. The 29-year-old went on to work nights at Ames Community College as a business monitor, but little did she know that her life would be eventually taken right outside of the college campus. Sadly, homicides were not unknown to the Jones family, as 6 years before Kay's death, her mother Eleanor Doris Jones also had her life taken by her jealous ex-boyfriend. Nobody could have imagined that, unfortunately, Kay's destiny wouldn't be much different from her mother's. That fatal night, Kay finished off her day of work by locking the business lab and making it to her car at around 10 p.m., according to a student who spotted her. Though Kay intended to drive back home, she sadly didn't make it far from campus. The following morning, Kay's husband, Stanley Day, awoke to find that his wife's side of the bed was empty, which of course concerned him. After Stanley contacted the police regarding his wife's safety, the authorities went ahead to spread her missing status and to go as far as describing her red 1977 Datsun station wagon to Kay's work colleague Patricia Harder, which was later spotted at approximately 5:30 p.m. Co-workers Warren Patek and Patricia Harder were on their way home when Harder noticed the Datsun, which was described by the police, covered in snow and parked under a water tower just across Ames campus. Harder informed Patek that the car resembled Kay's and that she had gone missing, which led the pair to park their car so that Patek could take a closer look. Patek peeked inside and could not believe his eyes when he spotted Kay's body in the back of the car. Harder proceeded to call 911, and thus the investigation of a case that would live as long as 41 years had begun. Investigators determined that Kay had been beaten, assaulted, and ultimately strangled with her own coat belt. They were able to collect multiple pieces of evidence. Police considered that Stanley Day, the victim's husband, could be a suspect, but due to lack of evidence as well as motive, and from swabs that were performed, they were able to determine that he indeed wasn't his late wife's attacker. Without the use of DNA testing, which would become common practice years later, solving Kay's case became almost impossible, and it inevitably went cold. Over 4 decades after the attack, Weld County Sheriff's Office assigned Detective Byron Castillon as the cold case investigator. As one of his first duties, Castillon prioritized 10 cold cases to go through, immediate investigation, one of them being Kay's. Castillon worked on Kay's case, was then finally able to get a match through the FBI's combined DNA index system. Ames Community College student James Dye. Dye had been clashing with authorities since before Kay's death, having been arrested and charged with assault 2 years prior. Though Dye's name had previously come up in a Weld County Crime Stoppers tip back in 1998, there was never a follow-up, even though the tipster informed that on the night of Kay's death, Dye had come home with his clothes soaked with blood, which he went on to destroy afterwards. It was said that on the night of Kay's death, Dye sat down to watch the news and informed his wife that there was a girl that was killed in Ames, even though her death was yet to be acknowledged by the media. As the tipster became uncooperative when asked about Dye's wife's name, the police were quick to dismiss his claims, which enabled Dye to continue with his criminal lifestyle for many more years to come. Although James Dye denied being involved with Kay's death and manifesting that he was clueless as to what had happened, having never heard of the case thanks to all the physical evidence and the genetic material found on the victim's coat, Dye was finally charged with Kay's death. 41 years had passed. The family, who had been tormented with such a heavy case for far too long, couldn't help but express their immense gratitude to the investigators. "Thank you so much for not giving up on this case. It means so much to our family," said Kay's cousin in a message to the investigators. "Even if it was far too long, it was never too late." The final case in today's video is the deaths of Tanya Van Kloiborg and Jay Cook. On November 18th, 1987, high school sweethearts Tanya Van Kloiborg and Jay Cook said goodbye to their families as they parted to Washington for an overnight road trip, completely unaware that they would never come back home. From their gruesome deaths to the following taunting letters, this case is still very present in people's minds. Despite only being together for 6 months, one could not deny that the Saanich-based couple were a cute pair, and were very much in love when things took their turn to the worse. Tanya, 18, and Jay, 20, met in high school not too long before their demise, and were described as sweet and caring people who really looked up to each other. The couple agreed to travel together from British Columbia, Canada to Seattle, Washington, as Jay needed to pick up furnace parts for his father. What happened once the couple arrived is something that would taunt their families for 31 years. On November 19th, 1987, Tanya and Jay failed to return home, and upon being told that Jay had never shown up to collect the parts, the family started feeling anxious as to what might have happened to the young couple. Another day went by, and the families couldn't help but report the pair as missing, as concern started rising. It was soon brought to their attention that the couple managed to make their way to Seattle as they were given directions by a store clerk since they had gotten lost, but their whereabouts were still unknown. On November 24th, 1987, lifeless Tanya Van Kloiborg was spotted by a nearby passerby in a wooded area in Mount Vernon, Washington. Her hands were tied. She had been assaulted and shot in the back of her head. All of her belongings, plus surgical gloves and a half-empty box of ammunition, were all found the day after under a tavern bench in Bellingham. Jay Cook was found later by a hunter on November 26th near a bridge 50 miles away from where Tanya's body was. Jay's body was hidden under a blue blanket, and upon examination, police confirmed he had been beaten, strangled with dog collars and twine. A couple's bronze van was found near the tavern where Tanya's belongings were abandoned, and inside were found rubber gloves and plastic ties, which led authorities to the conclusion that 1. Jay was most likely assassinated first, as the van was closer to Tanya's location. 2. Whoever assaulted the couple was well prepared for the situation. As the police started the investigation, they had come across evidence found on Tanya's clothing, as previously mentioned in the last case. Genetic testing wasn't yet widely available back then, so they weren't able to link it to a profile for many more years to come. With no witnesses and no suspects, the case had no other chance but to go cold. In the months following the couple's deaths, both families reported that they were receiving cards that taunted them and disclosed graphic information of their attack. For 23 years, police wondered if the letters that claimed the writer had taken the life of the couple came from the real killer, who was still out on the loose. They were later confirmed to be written by a mentally ill 78-year-old man who had no affiliation with the case whatsoever. Although it felt like a step back, and that they were far from solving what had happened on that night so long ago, in 2018, with the improvements made to DNA technology, Parrbah Nanotech was able to collect DNA from the found evidence. Then they created a phenotype report, which provided computer-generated images of the suspect's age progression compared to the year of the deaths, which confirmed that the killer was a white male with hazel or even green eyes, fair skin, possibly balding, and with freckles. After genetic genealogy helped to find a potential suspect, Snohomish County authorities began to follow the person of interest and managed to obtain a DNA sample from a discarded paper cup. As it was a full match, police proceeded to confirm that William Talbot was the couple's attacker, a 24-year-old truck driver at the time who lived with his parents a little over 5 miles from where the attack had taken place. Talbot acknowledged having intercourse with 18-year-old Tanya. He claimed that it was all consensual and that someone must have attacked the teens. Initially pleading not guilty to assassinating Jay and Tanya at the preliminary hearing, investigators appealed to anyone who knew Talbot at the time of the attacks to come forward. This resulted in many of the suspect's former friends confirming that the route he took for his deliveries matched the couple's journey. Talbot's former roommate confirmed that the suspect owned a blue blanket, just like the one that covered Jay's corpse when he was found, and that the suspect had personality changed when he drank, that he had taken him to the same area where Jay's body was found, and that he had a bronze van, much like Jay's, parked outside of his home. Needless to say that Talbot was convicted of both murders on July 24th, 2019. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although a very big tragedy for both Tanya's and Jay's families, it is definitely satisfying to know that justice had finally been served. As always, thanks for watching.